is this the role that we really want and want to go after? Because it's going to be painful and it's going to be hard. I've been at Google for a bit more than 12 years now. The most valuable conversations I have with people are people that are free to speak their mind because they know I don't have control over their career. Very dirty. I was standing on this machine and I was like drenched in all this oil. And so when I showered every day, like the water was black, basically, right? That's how you can imagine this. And I remember that day I went home, I hacked a bunch of software, and I spent until about 3 a.m. to try and come up with a way to accomplish his requirements. I could replicate what I did for this guy 5, 6, 10 times over during college, funded all my college doing this work that I did with him. And one of the first thoughts is like, dang, should I have joined OpenAI 6 months ago?
To your answer, I can say I'm right there with you.
First and foremost, Stephen, thank you very much. I think you have been super kind. You are someone who I have deeply respected for the content that you put across and the kind of experience that you have. And we have had our conversations probably once or twice in between. But I just wanted to introduce you to these are some super enthusiastic product aspirants who want to do well in life, build amazing products. And I think the beautiful part about this cohort and you coming in especially over there is because you have a deep experience in education products. And I think those kind of problems that we are also trying to solve over here. For sure. But I think once again, first and foremost, super grateful. I think everybody over here is super excited to talk to you, speak to you, ask questions. And I've told them to do their own research. So they ask you hard questions for sure. So that is where we will start. But before we start, guys, I think the first thing that I want to do is give a background of Stephen. I think what he has done, just to give a sense of the kind of work experience, the diverse work experience he had, right? So let me kind of quickly start. And Stephen did his BS in computer science long back, right? Then he essentially did his master's in information systems, and post that, then he did his master's where he was a 4.0 GPA, by the way, 4.0 GPA student, which essentially means that he was a studious one from the very beginning only. So post that, I think the first job that he did was as a statistician, where he spent around a year or so, and then he moved to Goldman Sachs as an analyst developer, where he spent like 3 odd years, which is very kind of syncs with his background in education, what the kind of degrees that he has done. And post that, I think probably the first switch, right? To Google, and then over there spending like 12 odd years in Google, working across multiple type of products, working on ads before that, and then moving to some areas of focus basically are education. Then he launched the Stadia product, and I'm sure everybody has heard of the Stadia product, which was the gaming product that Google launched. And then currently he's leading a team which leads learning experiences, and simultaneously specifically in product spaces such as mentoring, coaching, and the way that Googlers interact in general. So I hope I did justice to the introduction, and I would cordially ask Stephen to kind of give the opening remarks. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Shravan, for having me, and thanks to all of you who are here. My name's Stefan, and as Shravan said, I'm a product manager at Google. I've been at Google for a bit more than 12 years now, and I have been working in Google in London and in Mountain View. And then right now I'm in Google Germany. Prior to Google, as Shravan mentioned, I was a software engineer at Goldman in London. And prior to that, I was working as a statistician out of college, basically. My background's in software engineering and statistics. And I'm super excited to be here, and really excited to hear some of your questions and insights as well. And I also want to call out at this point, everything that Shravan does for the PM ecosystem is incredible. It's incredible to see someone so engaged, motivated, and I've rarely seen as many product manager jokes. And so if I ever come into the position of having to do improv comedy, I will shamelessly steal your material, my friend, because it will be really some good laughs there. So I do appreciate it. And and then I'm a little late. One thing that I can tell you, if you are a PM already, or if you're a PM at Google, or you strive to become a PM, you will always be late because your meetings will run over pretty consistently.
That's so true. Spoken like a true PM, for sure. For sure. So I think, Stephen, I would do this thing that I really want to structure this call in like 60 odd minutes, where first 30 minutes, I really want we to have like very authentic, open conversations about what were your failures? How did you essentially aspire to even become a product manager? How did you even know about the role? And then what is the difference between building products at scale and things like that? Whatever comes to my head, which is like very impromptu and improv that I just want to put across. And the remaining 30 minutes, I really want people from the cohort, including the mentors, because there is a mentor layer also, which kind of manages subgroups in the cohort, right? So they were also super excited, and they are PMs. Some are mid-stage PMs. Some are people who aspire to work for good companies like Google, Microsoft, and other places. I think a few questions from over there, and I think that would be a very nice way, essentially. And then these folks can essentially, if you find value and things like that, these folks can reach out to you on LinkedIn also to have deeper conversations, which they want to kind of put towards. I hope that's okay. Yeah.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Awesome. So let me quickly start by a very basic question. I think the thing that I want to ask is that you have had such a diverse career. You started with computer science, did mathematics and statistics to a certain level. Then you worked for a bank, which is specifically Goldman Sachs, which has a very different culture. Then you essentially moved to a company which is completely product focused, majorly B2C. It has B2B products also, but then again, majorly B2C, which is again a very different kind of art about how do you build products for the users, which are typically B2C, than the users who use the banking or financial ecosystem. So I just wanted to kind of understand this thing that, first of all, what is the definition of a product manager for you? That's one. And the second, and how do you essentially say that what are the core pillars of success, which kind of differentiates a good product thinker from an average thinker? And what are those traits that you've learned over your career of the last like 15, 16 odd years?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question to start with. So first, let me say that there was a very specific moment when I realized that product management might be something that plays to my strengths as a role. And that came reasonably late. I was at Goldman at the time, I was an engineer. I knew I wasn't a good enough engineer. The excellence in engineering in Goldman is sky high. And I didn't quite have access to the role definition of a product manager. So PMs didn't exist in Goldman at the time. I joined Google as a researcher, and I was excited because it had high brand value and research seemed okay, right? I didn't quite know what to expect, to be honest. And about 6 months in, I learned about the product role. And I remember I was in London at the time, and I researched that role online. And I immediately knew this would meet my strengths, and this would be something that I felt I could sustain for a long time. And that was really the start for me to try and go after that role. And it was another 7 interviews, even already being inside the company. So it wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to show up and be a PM. And moving to Mountain View certainly made it clear how high the bar really was on the PM role. And so I do think there is this moment where we all have to really be honest about to ourselves. We have to be honest to ourselves. Is this the role that we really want and want to go after? Because it's going to be painful and it's going to be hard, right? And in my mind, again, this came pretty quickly and it was true. And if we have this feeling that we know this is the right thing, the path to becoming a PM can be very faceted, very diverse, right? I had someone reach out to me a while ago. This is now 6 years ago. And they reached out for support to becoming a PM. And I gave them, a little bit of a thought and so on. And they ended up spending 3+ years filling their skill gap analyses and really perfecting the case for being a PM. And then they landed a job at Google, and it was the most incredible. So his name's Benji Soto. I actually have a blog post on the Product Insider about this experience, and it was remarkable. It's remarkable how much Benji invested in analyzing the skill gap using something like a role rubric, right? But also being determined about being a PM, right? He knew he'd be a PM. And you always have to think about your diverse background, and you always have to plug it into the role matrix and wonder about, okay, being at Goldman, right? Clearly financial industry, clearly different setup than classic tech, but it taught me how to launch production-worthy code. It taught me about reliability in code, right? You spoke earlier about products that scale to millions or billions of people. you need that mindset. You need to know that building something on App Engine won't cut it. And you need to be able to speak to your engineering team in that way. And so being at Goldman was amazing in that way. It also showed me the value of discipline, right? It is important to show up even when things aren't cool or when things are going haywire, which is a huge part of the Goldman culture. And I think, is really valuable to have gone through. You work with your business side every day. It showed me the value of understanding what is the end-to-end problem you're trying to solve, right? So concrete example at Goldman, I'm the engineering team of a trading desk in reinsurance. Sounds fancy. Guess what I had to do? I had to buy a scanner, physical paper scanner. You know why? Because when you do reinsurance, your contracts are in paper. And you won't change that overnight because this insurance stuff has been on paper for 350 years, right?
Sure.
But if you can increase the pace of scanning paper, you can increase the revenue of your desk. Guess what's most important to increase the revenue of your desk? Doesn't matter how you do it. So what does your tech team do? It goes out and buys a scanner. Again, internet line. You know what's really important? How fast you can send the scanned documents over the wire. What is shitty? The internet connection. What do? You go and get a faster internet connection, right? So it's these things that you think about that are really kind of anchored on the user problem that make you a PM. And you have to be relentlessly passionate about solving that problem. And you have to be hyper flexible about the mechanisms you choose, right? Whatever that is, right? You should make that proposal. You should lead that proposal. Ideally, it's tech-centric and software-based. Of course, we love that. Software and technology are highly scalable and so on, but that's my answer. It's be relentlessly passionate about the problem you solve and be relentlessly flexible on how you solve it.
I think it's a super interesting point that you kind of raised. And we have in the cohort spoken about, I think, two things which I think everybody would agree here is that you really have to be at the crux of the problem. The problem is far more important than the solution that you put across. But I think that's the first thing. And the second thing is that is very interesting that you kind of spoke about it, is we have consistently spoken about doing the boring things. People generally think that the boring things are not valuable, right? But it's the smallest of things, right? That can essentially lead to a very mammoth, like that system structure of bringing scale, bringing value, right? I think super interesting to answer that. I would quickly jump to the next question is, I would want to understand your journey. Can you give us like your background, that what happened like after you graduated college, right? Then you moved to Goldman. What were those experiences as a person, and probably a story from your past, maybe a failure story or something like a motivation story, which kind of comes across, which essentially talks about how did you get fascinated? How did you keep yourself motivated while you were going through those transitions? So what is your story of getting into this field slightly in deeper? That is something that people would, because people want to relate. People come from very varied backgrounds here, from sales, marketing, and other places, right? And a lot of times they have this thing in their heart that maybe I'm not the right fit. How do I figure out that I'm a fit or not? So probably putting that question that way.
Yeah, no, that's an awesome question. So I remember when I was in high school, just prior to college, I worked at this company, and it was it manufactured engine parts. And it was very blue collar, very dirty. I was standing on this machine and I was like drenched in all this oil, and I came home. So when I showered every day, like the water was black, basically, right? That's how you can imagine this. And the owner at some point realized that I was good in tech and that I understood something about websites. And so he pulled me aside and he said, "Hey, we need a website. Can you help us, right? Could you make an offer?" And he wanted this thing, which is now completely outdated, but it used to be a thing at the time. It was a CD that you could give to clients, and it would play a video, and it would have information about the company and so on. And I remember that day I went home, I hacked a bunch of software, and I spent until about 3 a.m. to try and come up with a way to accomplish his requirements. And I came back to him and I told him, yes, I can do it. And I think it was about 5 times the monthly salary that I got just for this one project, right? And I was just super excited. I was just so excited. I kept working on it every day, every night. Didn't have a car at the time, just my little moped, I took my moped and I went to Sony, and we had the CD produced. We had produced about 1,000 pieces of it. At the time was crazy, And And I loved it. And I felt, wow, I'm a PM. He characterized the problem to me. I knew the solution. I strung together all the pieces. And in this time, I also executed them myself. And the first time we put the CD in, played the video, it had a failure. And I did all my sanity checking, but I renamed the folder without renaming the pointer to the folder. And so when in the execution it tried to find the folder, it would break.
Wasn't there.
I was devastated. I was just devastated. I couldn't believe it, and I was right there like, I can fix it. And at the time, this owner of this company, he looked at me and said, I thought about it. And we took a chance on you. You're inexperienced. You're one of our interns, our summer interns, doing something completely different. And we gave this job to you, and you did a great job. And this is a wrinkle. This is certainly something that we didn't anticipate, but we will leave it as is, right? And that was one of the most remarkable moments to me, because you do the best you can, and sometimes you come back and it's not perfect. It doesn't meet the perfection bar, but you did within your realm what you could. You really went after something. You really engaged. And that part is more important than the judgment call, right? It is that makes progress, right? I didn't know which software to use, and I fixed it. I didn't know how to build a CD, and I fixed it. I didn't know how to mass produce it, and I fixed it. And all these steps were so much more valuable, right? Than even looking back at it now. The money is benign, right? I mean, now thinking about, oh my God, I cared so much about the pay. Now I'd be like, no, you should care about the experience, F the pay, right? You worry about the pay, right? And so it is so hard sometimes in the now. You get tied to these little tokens of success that in hindsight are just not the tokens that really determine success, right? What determined success for me was that I could replicate what I did for this guy 5, 6, 10 times over during college. I funded all my college doing this work that I did with him. And guess what? No folder was ever labeled wrong again in the future, right? and so I think it's really important to try and take inventory. And sometimes that can only be done in hindsight, and wonder, what are the things that have durable value? And it's likely not the money. It's likely not someone else's judgment, but it's likely your own honest perception about, did I do as good as I could, and what can I learn from that?
Cool. I think that's again something that's super, super interesting that you talked about. What I would definitely want to ask, since you spoke about this experience, is, are there certain principles, do you think, that a good product thinker, somebody who wants to solve problems at scale, somebody who wants to add value significantly at a user level, right? Are there certain principles that a product manager or any person who's trying to solve that problem? I think this role came in limelight maybe like 15, 20 years back. Before that, it used to exist in different words, maybe in different titles, right? But do you think there are certain specific principles that a great person who essentially then has the chance to become a great product leader has, and something that these students should imbibe from day one? Because you and me probably learned over a period of time after 8 years making mistakes. But what are those things, 3, 4 major principles that they should focus consistently on over the period of their careers?
Yeah, that's a really good call. So I think the first thing that comes to my mind immediately is, when you're really passionate about the user problem, you have to be passionate about the end-to-end experience of the user. And you have to assume accountability for that, whether you like it or not, right? There's a big part that I think makes a difference from your sort of functional mindset to a product mindset, is that the functional mindset has very clear boundaries of responsibility. And those boundaries are to deliver the mock, or to deliver the UX, or to deliver the research report. And these are awesome, right? But in any function, but you can make a bigger difference if you expand that scope to encompass the end-to-end experience. And I would say for PMs, it is a necessity. If you don't do that, you will sort of like default back into maybe more of a project manager mindset, as opposed to it sort of like being a product leadership mindset. And that's really going to cap your growth. And so it is really to dig deeper on what are the pieces that the user is exposed to end, and understand those. And that's the second thing, from a first principles mindset, right? It is really important to not just wonder about things on the surface, but to really pressure test the assumptions that you're making as you think about the user experience, right? Yes, you might have a great app, but what's the internet connection going to be like, right? Is the person going to have connectivity? Well, you're not in the business of deploying connectivity. You're in the business of building an app. Guess what? It is tied together at the hip. If you fail acknowledging that, and I can give you an anecdote to that, right? Larry Page, when the first Android experiences came out, we had Android, everyone loved it. He was on stage and he said, I'm excited about what we did, but I'm a little sad that we optimized the experience to the Wi-Fi speed in Mountain View and not to the Wi-Fi speed in regions that are way more realistic to our user base, right? And he was obviously speaking about places in the world that, weren't on 5G up prior to everyone being on 5G. And it made him sad, right? And it was remarkable because essentially what he said to everyone in the room was like, look, you missed a big part that significantly affected the experience and you did not take responsibility for it. And it is your responsibility. And it was one of these learnings where I felt if you have that as a PM natively, I think the sky's the limit. Obviously, a big part, in addition to all of this, is how to manage the team without authority. A lot of you will know this already, but as a PM, you don't have authority. And I think that's a good thing. The most valuable conversations I have with people are people that are free to speak their mind because they know I don't have control over their career. They will tell me outright that this design will not be sufficient, this type of tech solution will not be sufficient, no matter how much I push for maybe a faster timeline or a different way of looking at the UX, right? There are all these trade-offs we have to make. And in that moment, you're really lost if you have almost too much authority over people. You need people to be able to speak freely, right? The next thing that I'd say is that in all of that, communication is key. PMs are here to provide clarity. If you have trouble or if it's something that you struggle with, that you synthesize data, that you synthesize a lot of information and you distill it down into something that supports decision making, you're really letting your team down. And so practicing that, almost sort of like, reverse engineering a decision, or even practicing just trying to make a product decision, right? Like, how would you improve Netflix, right? Try, go out, find all the info, try and synthesize it, and try and say in as little words as possible, here are the top 3 things that Netflix should do, and here's why, right? They'll make for a great LinkedIn post. You'll truly get a lot of followers, and you will see just how difficult that is and how much work that is, right? And so, again, this is something that I feel is absolutely discriminating excellent product managers from maybe more kind of project manager style PMs.
I think one of the very interesting things that you spoke about, and I think we have spoken that there's this famous quote by George Bernard Shaw that sometimes the best way to gain control is to give control.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's something that's super cool about influencing without authority. But I would want to kind of dig deeper in this thing that how do you essentially motivate someone who is your peer, not necessarily your subordinate, not necessarily your superior who is probably looking into the same problem, but somebody who stands parallel to you? How do you essentially do that as a senior PM, as someone who leads a team of PMs? How do you essentially drive that conversation actually? Because everybody comes with their own biases, their own thought process, right? How do you align different skill-setted people to one direction and say that this is what we want to build and this is why we want to build?
Yeah. I thought a lot about this, and it's actually something that, I had a bit of a breakthrough moment not too long ago. It's probably now 5 years ago. It's still, it's quite a while ago, but it's not wasn't at the very beginning of my career. And so I do think there's 3 ways how you can influence. The first one is by relationship. So you can build relationships with individuals around you, and if that's the culture within your organization, I think that's often a effective way. You build trust with individuals, and then they will truly listen to you, and they will also trust your judgment, and that will make it easier to essentially pitch to them and have their ear on what it is you care about. And that's a little bit how Google works, I think, is kind of more a corporate organization that works by relationship. I think the second one is, essentially by user value, right? It is by user impact. It's the idea that you can say, okay, here is user value, and whether you like me or trust me or have a relationship with me, we should all look at the same. We should all look at the same data. We should all look at the same reality, almost, right? And I think that's what I heard. And again, I've never worked there, but Amazon seems to be an organization that is very much deeply, deeply attached to that user impact, and so almost sort of like entirely discounts that sort of relationship component. And in that sense, I sometimes feel they're faster to market, right? It feels like, they're just putting something out when they see there's value. And yeah, it does feel like they operate differently. It probably makes up for other shortcomings. I think the third one, just very broadly speaking, is ultimately by authority, right? Ultimately, it's by a seniority level or some level of expert opinion, if you want. And people like to discount this a lot. They're like, oh no, we're just data driven, we're super objective. And the reality is, when I was in Google, for the longest time, I worked in analytics, and I worked together with a guy called Paul Murray. And Paul Murray founded a company called Urchin, and he sold that company, or co-founded that, and he sold that company to Google, and that became Google Analytics. And Paul knew everything about the ecosystem inside and out, and it was just a bliss to work with him. It was just one of the most amazing things. And so maybe calling it authority is the wrong term here, because it's not about giving top-down orders. It's not like the military, but it's more like, they can show you and highlight spaces and dynamics of spaces and how things operate in a way that you quickly understand that you can trust them and trust their judgment, right? And so you don't need a relationship, you don't need data. It's like, I know Paul knows, right? And I know because he has the credibility to know. So maybe instead of authority, we should say credibility. And so those are the three things you can leverage, right? And again, I'm a corporate PM in a big organization that is more relationship driven. It would always be a combination of the three things, right? And you can always adjust which one you focus on. Google is an organization that's probably it operates most in the relationship and data driven sort of pillars. I'm sure if you go out into a startup world, you need to have someone with expertise in a field to build this product. You're only a couple of people. You would not be able to teach someone, right, or bring someone in without any knowledge, right? So again, this credibility level needs to be very, very high, and typically you don't have a lot of time to challenge people to create research studies for months on end. You need to already have some information on things. And so again, to me, the three pillars here are relationship, data, and credibility. And you should always look at those three and adjust your approach given the environment.
I think it's a very interesting point that you raise, because sometime back I was talking to this interesting venture capitalist firm based out of Singapore, which is Jungle Ventures, and somebody asked the very same question. I think it pivots to the third point, that they essentially gave like a 5 million seed round to some founders who just came with a deck, and everybody is asking them, why did you give them money for the deck? They said the same thing. They've spent 25 years in the insurance space. They probably know more than what we know about the space. So that's why they made that bet. But I think, Stephen, first and foremost, once again, super grateful for all of this. Now, I think we are almost at a 30-minute mark. What I want now to do is, people who have prepared questions, please raise your hands. I will allow one person to essentially come and ask the questions. In between, I will tell when the mentor's question will come across. I will put that across. It would be great that people start raising their hands and essentially start asking question, and I'll bring one person in the spotlight who can ask the question directly. Yeah, yes, sure. Cool. So let me quickly start by Anshul. Athar, can you put Anshul in the spotlight? Yeah. Anshul, go ahead. Yeah. Yes.
Hi, Stephen. Hope you're doing well. I have a question. I come from a very similar background of yours, where I'm a developer right now, looking to transition into product management. And I always feel that there is always a sense of skill set debt or learning debt, because when you're a developer or a team lead, you are working in a constraint of technology, right? And when you think about transitioning into a product management kind of a role, you think about UI, UX, wireframings, stakeholder management, and all of those things. So how do you transition that mindset, and how do you gather that knowledge, one, but also prepare yourself for the fact that there is always going to be somebody who is going to be better in a certain sense, even if they are your peers, or but they are working in a specific environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first off, I'm happy. Thanks for the question, Anshul, and I'm happy that you are looking into sort of joining onto the PM ladder. I think engineering backgrounds are incredibly valuable. Obviously, not required, but incredibly valuable for especially more technically minded PMs or PMs in tech. The one thing that makes PMing so interesting is that there is no educational path that is a one-size-fits-all path. And that's why following people like Shravan or the work that I try to do on the productinsider.com are ways to support the ecosystem in that transition. So there are role rubrics, there are role descriptions out there that are published by the tech companies that are a reasonable way to understand, okay, what are the basic skill categories that people expect me to know, like writing PRDs and creating mocks and thinking about prototypes and so on. And then there's a less obvious layer, as you mentioned as well, like stakeholder management, communication, right? And that's obviously a much more kind of like, are you good at it? You should be a good storyteller. Like, what the hell does that mean, right? Like, should I now work at Disney and like come up with some cartoons or something? Like, I don't know. So there are some things where it's really just you have to try it out, and that's a bit of an unfortunate thing because I think when you come from tech, it is an environment, maybe almost like no other environment, where you can practice without big exposure or big damage all the time, right? You can write code and it can stink, and you just wrote it and you fix it. And it's not really, unless you push it and publish it and it went through review and it crashed the system, right? You had a very quiet practice round that no one ever heard about, right? And that's a very comfortable feeling. And in product, there's no such thing. It is always going to be visible. It's always going to sting. It's always going to be out there. And so developing a resilience that when you are doing something that doesn't hit the mark, you're not withdrawing back into a shell, but you are taking at it again, is probably one of the most common personality traits I've seen in PMs. And if you feel that is costing you energy, you're not alone, but that's going to be a consistent thing, right? I once had a review with a really senior guy at Google, senior PM director at Google. And I was terrified. And this person kind of, like talked to me prior to the review and said a couple of things where I was like raising my eyebrows a little bit. And I think he was trying to be nice, but I was just so nervous. And then I looked at my manager and I talked to him about it. And he said, well, that's just the nature of the game, You're going in, some things you say people will like, some things they won't like. There will be debates, right? There will be discussions. The key thing is this is not about you as a person, okay? It is all in favor of, right, fixing the product. And unlike writing code, it is hard to verify that. It is in some ways a matter of conversation. And when you think about conversing with someone, right, it's a way less precise mechanism than verifying whether your code does what it's supposed to do. That's a very deterministic thing. And so I would encourage you to think about this aspect of it, which is how can I be resilient to interpret feedback, even though it stings, as a learning, as opposed to it being personal criticism.
100% agree with you.
Awesome. I think an interesting question, and Anshul, since we have consistently spoken about this, opinions are trivial, feedback is not. I think that's something that is coming back reiteratively. That's a super cool thing. I think the next person I would just put you off the spotlight. Stephen Kazim Bhai is joining us from the US. So I'll just bring him into the spotlight. Give me a second. Yes. So we have people from like multiple countries over here. Give me a second. I think I did it. Sorry, I'm pretty technically challenged as a PM. Unfortunately, I do these things. But Kazim Bhai, please go ahead. And
Thank you so much, Shravan. And Stephen, Yeah, glad to connect with you. Thank you so much. So my role is so coming from a background of customer experience management. So like I used to work for around 8 years there. Right now, I'm doing master from here, right? Engineering management right now, Central State University. So based on your extensive experiences in PM field, what key skills and perspective do you believe that someone coming from the field like could bring into the field of PM at the same time? What are the key transferable skills which would help that person to grow into this field? The strength part of your role which you worked previously now. So yeah, what kind of mix that person could bring right now in this role, transitioning from that point of view?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So obviously PMs are coming from this massive diverse set of backgrounds, and management backgrounds or consultancy backgrounds are really useful because they really are at the core of thinking about a problem, right? And almost sort of like detaching themselves from legacy. And so one thing that I like about people that I work with that have a more managerial or more general manager background is they don't instantly knee jerk into thinking about, oh, this is going to be impossible because our stack is like that and it's going to be crazy complicated or crazy expensive, right? They're free from that. They're like, their job is to go into a company and tell them what to do and not worry about the history and the legacy and so on. And I think that's a powerful mindset to have. And it's used a lot in creative problem solving for PMs, right? So when you think about design thinking, for example, right, then that's kind of the core of it. But I think what PMs also need is the execution part of it, right? Unfortunately, when you end your creative problem solving workshop, you have a bunch of ideas, and now it's on you to take the cross-functional team through executing. And so in some ways, the PM role really combines these two things, right? It combines the let's have ideas, let's think out of the box, let's create new ideas, but it has to find ways to then translate that into concrete initiatives that also will realize that impact. Right. And that's an accountability that you don't often have in the management consultancy space. Yeah. And sometimes in the tech space or in the execution space, you have none of the ideas, right? All you care about is that your system keeps running the way it ran yesterday. And so it lacks that creativity and that innovation. And so as a PM, I think we need to face off into these both of these worlds. And it really helps to have credibility in both of these worlds, right? And so I think as you think about the footprint of your skills, think about it in context of what gives you credibility to lead a creative problem-solving workshop and be innovative, but what also gives you the credibility to speak honestly about what are the things we can do as a first step? What are the things we can implement with the resources we have? What technology do we have access to? And how can we actually implement things with that technology that realize benefits from that high-level idea, right? And that's ultimately going to be an interesting process because it will feel like you have a great idea and all you can do is this little thing, right? It will feel like you're probably doing a smaller part than maybe up there. So what you have to manage as an individual in all of this is that you don't feel like it's disappointing, right? I think it's nice to go to a company as a management consultant, talk about high in the sky stuff and 10-year plans, take the money and then leave after the project's done and wonder about how this will be implemented, but that's not your problem to solve. And that's way easier than coping with the situation of like doing that, but then being the same person who says, well, and guess what? The first thing we can start with is that small, right? and not feeling like you're letting everyone down or not feeling like this isn't good enough, right? So you have to learn to kind of own both of these things. And I think what you're describing, you're really on the right way to practice both of these aspects and can combine them. And once you're combining them for the first time in real life, I think that's going to be a moment where you can look back and forever will look at it and say, wow, I understood the idea, but I also executed on it. And you will get a tremendous amount of respect for it. If you can actually realize even the smallest piece, so many people will say to you, I never thought it possible. I always thought we were just dreaming. I never thought possible that small step was in it for us, right? And so it is the disproportionate value that you get once you come through on the other end.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you. Thank you.
So now what I want to do is I want to bring some women folks over here. They generally don't speak, but I consciously wanted to bring them on board. So Kanya, why don't you go ahead? And guys, I'll come back. It's in the interest of time. I'm just choosing across who can ask questions, but I just want a fair opportunity for everyone. So Kanya, Atharv, can you put Sukanya? Yeah.
So I'm like, thanks, Shravan, for giving us the opportunity to speak with the PM at Google. Thanks, Stephen. So I am having 8+ years of experience at Juniper Networks as the engineering lead. So here I find fun in solving complex problems, bug fixing, brainstorming at times. So do we, as I now want to transition or like a switch to this product domain, do we get similar kind of challenges in product? Because in product, what I think is like, we think about the solution, but we don't implement it. Engineers will implement at the end. So do we have that scope of brainstorming and fixing bugs and challenges in PM role?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. So ultimately, one of the things that is remarkable and keeps being remarkable to me is how often, even for simple problems, the path to a solution reveals new information that changes the way we think about the problem. So even for small bugs that we find, right, we think about how to address them and we go through that process. And together with engineering, we then discover that, oh, actually, this isn't how we thought at all, right? This is not, the root cause isn't this piece of technology, or there is better ways to do this, right? And then as a product manager, we have an opening, we have an opportunity to actually influence the solution in a better way, right? And it's not necessarily that either function by itself would be able to yield that result. And so what I'm thinking about is essentially that you could just file a bug ticket. And so when I worked in Google Analytics, for example, we had this bug ticket and it came in and it said, oh, this setup flow is bad. And I want a better setup flow. And I looked at this and I just came from Goldman. I was like, why can't just engineering do this? Why do they need a PM, right? And when I started looking deeper into it, it turned out that the flow wasn't broken by itself. It was actually technically correct. It worked well, but it wasn't very intuitive and it didn't support new users of Google Analytics. It was an expert user functionality, right? And so for the first time, I recognized that, wow, what you could implement here can be technically correct, but it can not support well a big segment of the user base, right? And so as a product manager, then you can't go and say, well, your solution's not working, because it is working, right? But what you can say is you can say, look, it doesn't have the most value that it could have. There's all these people out there and they struggle, right? And it's not because your solution's bad, it's because they have different needs. And so then you can have a conversation about the needs of the user. And we ended up building a flow that would really guide people, that would really provide way more contextual information. And then certainly that needed implementation, right? We needed to implement a different UI. We needed to implement a different data set that was pulled in. So there's a lot that happened on the engineering side as well. But it was that moment where you realize you need to talk together about the solution, and then you get a bigger value, right? And I think that's really what changes when you become a PM. But that's also happening in organizations that have a strong connection between Eng and PM, right? So even if you're an engineer, right? I have a lot of engineers who raise a hand to me and say, look, I think this could be done better, right? Because they themselves feel accountable for the user value, right? So a lot of TLs, tech leads in Google, help champion the product perspective.
Awesome. So next, what I want to do is, I think I want one of the mentors essentially to come in, because I want to give opportunity to them also. They are tirelessly working to help these folks think better and do things. I think, Subhashish, would you want to go ahead? Yeah. Can
Sure.
Subhashish on the spotlight? So Subhashish is, Stephen is already a senior PM at ADP. So he has been helping folks. He's been very kind with that. Yeah.
Hey, hi, Stephen. Hi, how are you? Good?
Good, how are you? Thanks.
I'm good. Thanks. So, Stephen, I have one quick question. So as a Google PM or as a PM for any product, so often we see that when Google have into multiple spaces of the business, we see that there are multiple competitors for the Google who are seamlessly trying to create a better version of the product which Google is working on. For example, let's say OpenAI. So when OpenAI came into the market or similar such product when it comes to the market, so when your competitor is basically coming up with a better version of the product that Google is trying to create, so as a PM, what are your immediate plan of action that you take and what are the approaches and how you plan those things to mitigate and have a strong competition in the market?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. Like one of the first thoughts is like, dang, should I have joined OpenAI 6 months ago? Definitely. So I'm not going to lie, as a corporate PM, the pace with which you can drive innovation is just going to be affected by the way your organization operates. And oftentimes that's a function of size, right? That's just what it is. And so, and in some ways, you always wonder, okay, can I innovate at the pace? Can Google still innovate at the pace? And I heard Larry Page say this one time, which was remarkable. Like it's when Bing came out. Bing came out and Apple Maps came out, and there was quite a lot of moments in the past where we had real strong products in market, but then a competitor brought a really strong competitor product in market. And Larry said, this is good. This is good. Search wouldn't be where it is without Bing being there and innovating, right? Maps wouldn't be where it is without Apple Maps being there and innovating. And in some ways, you just always have to think about a space and you have to be excited about the space, right? I'm currently the product lead for engineering education. I'm excited about the tech learning space. I want to see the tech learning space blow up. Now, ideally, I want to own a large chunk of that and implement things at Google in that space and have Google be successful and beyond Google create success with my products. But generally, I'm passionate about the space, right? And if you apply that mindset, right, Larry is passionate about search. He wants to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And so he loves the fact that people are passionate about that space. It's a little bit like Elon Musk's mindset with SpaceX. He's excited about becoming a multistellar species, right? Yes, he's operating in it, but if someone else, like if that creates a race that other companies come in, he's like, yeah, hell yeah, that's awesome, right? So as a PM, I think it's nice to be passionate about the space. I think that's an authentic source of energy for me. And it's nice to then know your own place in that space, right? At Google, we have about 2 billion users on search. If we throw AI functionalities against that volume, it does mean a quite different footprint in machine usage and in consequential in cost, right? That is a consideration that maybe you don't have to make if you're a different company and you have a lot less volume. And so it is that level of thinking that you then have to apply, right? And so my capabilities to launch broadly are affected by those considerations, where if you're in a competitor space and you don't have that type of footprint, you might be able to say, you know what, we'll try. And if it blows up, hell yeah, it should blow up, right? Google can't say that, right? We don't want search to blow up. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Another question from one mentor, and then there will be 3 more questions, I think, in the interest of time. So I will essentially pick Praveen, why don't you go ahead? Yeah.
Sure. Hey, Stefan. I had one question which is very peculiar to Google. So from a lot of friends who work in Google, I understand that Googliness is a concept that is very native to Google. I feel that the word is very subjective. I wanted to get your opinion on it because it's something that is extremely relevant and present in Google, and how or what are similar things similar to that word that's present in, let's say, Microsoft or Amazon or something like that.
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And I think there's been, the original founders letter at Google was something that included Googliness as well. And I think there was some updates that have been made to that founders letter that at some point, caused a bit of a more public discussion around, okay, what's happening with Googliness and where is it and what role does it play? Hang on, just give me 1 second. Make sure I don't lose the room here. So in my mind, there's a couple of really valuable behaviors that an organization can champion and master. And they are essentially encapsulated by the term Googliness. And I can just draw from my own experience. So this is not a comprehensive list or whatever, but I can tell you, for example, that in Google, we really think about assuming good intentions is one of these traits. We oftentimes hear information through different channels, either indirectly from others or through email or through chat, or even just by observing decisions essentially being enacted. And there's a host of stories you can tell yourself about the reason for these decisions or the rationale behind it. And our brains, and this is something we understand from neuroscience and people like Andrew Huberman, for example, that our brains are wired to be on guard, right? That's kind of our history as humans. Defending our keep against tigers and such. And so oftentimes we tend, or science believes that oftentimes humans tend to be biased toward a negative story. And Googliness is a way to try and counteract that bias, right? And so assuming good intentions is a way to mind hack a little bit and think, okay, what do those people, what are legitimate reasons? What are positive reasons why this could have happened this way, right? And it allows you to retain another behavior, which is to stay curious, right? You should go in and wonder, hey, I'm just curious. Like, I really want to understand, because that does not send a signal that you are making a prejudgment, right? And the dangers with prejudgments aren't necessarily that they're wrong. The real danger is that they cut off conversation, right? And cutting off conversation is the much bigger threat, right? People would not want to continue the conversation, and that's going to be really preventing positive things from happening. And so I think it was a stroke of genius that they encapsulated some of this behavior in Googliness, and then they made it more formal, right? Like, it is something where I can call on that. I can say when someone comes and says, oh my God, this happened and this is so horrible, I can say, you know what, I'm happy to explain to you why. No one here was malicious, right? No one here had any bad intentions. And it is understood that that puts me in a power position, right? It is understood that if you come in with judgment, you're ultimately in a weaker position. And so the incentive structures are creating gravity toward the exchange, toward the trying to mutually understand what was going on. And that just makes for a non-toxic work environment, right? The danger of non-googly behavior is not that, we don't like to hang out much or whatever, right? It is that people are leaving. Good people will leave toxic work environments, right? If you have the feeling that you can't trust the people you work with, you're ultimately head out, you go to another company, and that would really be causing a downward spiral for the company. And so I think it was a smart choice to embed Googliness almost in the interview rubric.
Got it.
Awesome.
Thank you, Stefan.
Awesome.
You're welcome.
So last three questions. Guys, it doesn't mean that you cannot ask more questions. The thing is, in the interest of time, I have to cut it short. First thing, Shahid Bhai. Second thing, I would say Dev Bhai. And third is Yashvi. Please be prepared. You three people, because yahi dikh rahe ho mere ko in the viewport. So Shahid Bhai, please go ahead. Shahid Bhai is again, Shahid is joining us from the US. Stephen, again.
Hey,
Yeah. Hi, Stephen. Thanks for giving your time. So I'm working from home because it's snowing today, my first snow. So I'll quickly move to the question, right? So I was reading one of your articles, right? When Ravan told us that you are coming, we started looking for you, and you are not a difficult person to find on LinkedIn, right? So I came across one of your article, Magic for Product Managers, right? Which you have written recently. And my question is specific to the third magic sentence, right? I'm right there with you. So I know I have been a business analyst in a BFS, working with UBS for the last 10 years. So I know that empathy works, right? But the world is becoming more transactional, right? It is more transactional. We are moving towards that kind of a world. So does only empathy always work? Or, if you can share some instances from your struggle at Google, right? That, expressing a shared struggle help you to come up with a collaborative solution.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and certainly it's always more nuanced than just one or the other. I think the sentence "I'm right there with you" just signals that that humility, that you understand that there is a problem and it's difficult, right? And it's okay to think about the problem as a difficult problem, and that's a bonding thing. It makes sure that people know that you see them as human and you don't see them as some entity, right? I had a conversation about this with another PM earlier today, and we used the example of when you're in a car and you get cut off, right? The other driver in the other car is not human to you. You're gonna be furious, and clearly that's not a situation in which you can make good decisions or you can drive any form of collaboration. So the part that I'd say is that what I would pair humility with is a principled approach, right? And that is in general psychology, that's known as boundary setting. You want to set boundaries for yourself, right? Because otherwise you open yourself up for some form of abuse. And this boundary setting needs to happen in a way that feels reasonable and normal. And a principled approach is something you can leverage in a professional work environment, right? You can derive principles of working together, and you can call on these principles in moments where you feel they're violated, and you should. And in those moments, the principle ideally helps you to call on these boundaries without escalating, meaning it is not a moment where outright conflict arises, but it is a moment where you can share the principle boundary and you can enact that. Now, something that I think is an example for that is, for example, we are all human beings, and every day we go into a workplace and we're affected by 1,000 things that happen in our private life. And in some workplaces, there is an expectation that you hang that on the door when you come in. And I had that feeling at Goldman. I don't think Goldman was like that, but I think I had that strong feeling at Goldman that I have to hang up my own stuff at the door, come in and be this wheel in a big machine and just function, right? And I think at Google that's different. People are bringing more of their self to work, and that does require to wonder, okay, in what way is that? In what way can I kind of, still work together with others? In what way can that affect me in a normal way? And it's very liberating to know that when I had a rough day, for whatever reason, or I just moved apartments. We also had the first snow just now in Munich, and we moved, and it was crazy, and everything happened all at once. And I was able to say, look, I would love to do this for you, but I just moved, and it's very busy right now. And here is what I can offer to you, but I can't do more than that right now. And it was a very healthy way to say, I'd like to be empathetic to your problem, but here is my capacity constraint. And it is because of things that happen in my life. And if you have a problem with that, right, we can talk about it. But you kind of articulate like, I have these boundaries and that's how I operate. And, when you work in the military, for example, those boundaries are given to you. It's not that you can define them or have to define them. But when you work in like a tech company or in any other workplace culture, you need to figure out what those boundaries and principles are. But once you have figured them out, there is a way to leverage them and to hold them against this moment of like, everyone can do anything and all we have to do is be empathetic.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Stephen. To your answer, I can say I'm right there with you.
Awesome. So, Stephen, can we take 10 more minutes of your time asking 2 more questions? Would that be okay?
Yeah, that's
awesome.
Okay.
Awesome. Dave, why don't you come into the spotlight? Yeah, Athar, can you put... So, Dave is joining us from Dubai, by the way, Stephen. Yeah.
Hey, hi, Stephen. Hi, Sean. Thanks for the opportunity. So, Stephen, I'm working as a e-commerce product manager in Dubai. And there is one book I've been reading of lately, recommended by Shravan, The Cold Start Problem by Andrew Chen, and talks about how do you build networks, how do you scale them, what are the anti-network effects. So this is a topic which I'm quite fascinated with. So Google has forayed into this. So basically, my question is of 2 parts. First, regarding more specific to Google, and generally, the second part more about the PM and the pitfalls we have. So the first part, Google has tried multiple attempts, like be it Orkut, be it Google Plus, Allo. There's been multiple attempts, not just by Google, even like of lately, Facebook or Meta tried through threads. They wanted to create a social network competitor, but they've been failing quite lately. So my first question is, has Google given up, or there going to be maybe a future attempt, at that space? And the second question, which is kind of, trickling down from the failure problem, like we as PMs, we can pitch our products, we can be very data driven, but if it fails, not just fails once, twice, thrice, multiple time it fails, it kind of erodes your credibility. And since as a PM, you don't have a direct authority over your subordinates or your colleagues, then if you have multiple failed attempts, even though you're trying your best to make calculated attempts, because at the end of the day, you can never be sure what's going to work, what's not, right? So when you fail, so how do you maintain your credibility? How do you still continue to be relevant in the company and and stay motivated? So these are my two-part questions. Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you for asking them. Those are questions we probably need another session on, because they're obviously really, really deep and so on. So to answer your first question around, Google's approach with social and so on, clearly Google had the best of intentions in a time where, social was just figuring itself out. And, Google Plus, for example, was just not something that took off, right? People didn't feel like it was helpful enough, or it would support their needs enough. And I think sometimes that's just okay, right? You realize we thought here is something that we could do and we could do well. And it turns out that users don't think this way. Now, what I actually was close to a similar sort of like situation. It wasn't social, but it was Stadia, which was in gaming, which also ended up being shut down. And I can draw some comparisons there. I wasn't close to Google Plus at the time, outside of just having the visibility inside of the company, of it being sort of promoted and so on. But I can tell that I feel, Google Plus at the time, it was just really not that valuable in a way, right? And I think what I like about Google Photos, for example, which is what was left over from Google Plus, right? Google Plus highlighted areas of value, and with the core, what you would say like the core feature set of like a Facebook, for example, right? The feed and the thing, right? There, we didn't quite match that value or exceed that value. That's why I think those core functionalities that someone would label as like a social platform, they did not sort of survive. But we highlighted something really interesting, which is like there's a community out there. And there is a community out there, and it is around photos. It is around people who take photos, who share photos, and so on. We should have done Instagram at the time, which we didn't. But we developed Google Photos in the end. And it's awesome, right? It's a great example of a small team finding a real problem and iterating on it until they have a solution that really matches the problem, and growing that. And it's recently been a billion user plus product, right? So it really grew incredibly well. And it came out of the experimentation of a Google Plus. Now, what I think Google Plus and Stadia didn't do well, they went very public very early on. And I think that was challenging for everyone involved, right? What Google Photos did really well is it remained really small, really humble, right? And it was very much a team that really excited about your feedback, was really excited about iterating, really preserved the ability to change their mind in a safe way. And there's a theory around that. It's called safe to fail experiments. And it speaks to what you're talking about, which is how publicly can you fail and retain credibility, right? And that is really challenging if you set yourself up very visibly and you come out very strongly, not yet having built the thing, not yet having gone through some of these learnings, right? In Stadia, we know, right, the failure was very visible, right? The failure was something that was very public, and it left people scarred, right? What you want to do as a product manager is you want to understand that aspect of it. It's the end-to-end thing, right? You, as a PM, own the PR side, right? It is part of your end-to-end responsibilities, right? You're not the head of PR, maybe, right? But if you're a PM on Stadia and you saw what was presented at big stage conferences, and then you looked inward at, where were we? What was the status, right? yes, it did. You did wonder, like, is this going to be too much? Did we create too high of an expectation in the marketplace? And I think that's a dynamic that you need to observe carefully. And with photos, it was a great example of not doing that. We did not create a big expectation. We solved an important problem. We iterated relentlessly in a safe way. And once we found something, that's when it grew, right? And that's a very healthy way to do that. Now, I applaud organizations that help teams operate that way, but it does stand at the odds of being under pressure to find the next big thing. I do know people weren't acting maliciously when they went on the big stage. They just truly felt they had found the next big thing, right? They were truly convinced about it, right? Now, again, it is a trade-off. It's all easier in hindsight, but that's the trade-off that I learned being close to the social thing and being close to the Stadia thing.
Awesome. So, Yashvi, I'm extremely sorry in the interest of time because we're already 10 minutes over this. Extremely sorry. You can put the question by reaching out to Stephen. But I think, Stephen, the first thing that I would just want to speak about is since almost like 97% of the audience is still here. So that essentially means they had a lot of fun. And I'm pretty sure. So before we kind of wrap up, and I have 2-3 announcements that I essentially want to make, let's take a quick photo. I'll just move into gallery view and I want everyone to switch on their cameras. I know I'm not the most good looking person, but if I can do it, you guys can definitely do it. Sure. So just at 3, we'll do cheese. 1, 2, 3. Cheese. Awesome. Awesome. So another thing, so I just want to put this across to all of you guys is that Stephen is going to be very soon going to be active in the community. And that is, I'm going to put all the links to Stephen's profile and simultaneously all of those things and build a GTM around that. And he has been super kind and he'll be super helpful in your preparation for if you aspire to be a product manager at Google, how do you reach out to him? So I will put all the profiles, the LinkedIn profile and everything and the product insider links in the community, as well as tagging it on the YouTube video. That's one. The second thing is, honestly, Stephen, from my side, I'm enamored by your humility, by the gratitude that you showed. I think you have been super, super grateful. You have been super kind. And one thing that I definitely take away from this conversation is the ability to conversate to people's hearts. And I think you've done it tremendously well. I can definitely say everybody believes so. Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. And once again, I am definitely going to call you again and again for these kind of sessions. So this is not just a start of an engagement, but it's going to prolong very long. So once again, thank you very much. Would you want to kind of end up with closing words? Would you want to?
No, I just want to thank everyone for your great enthusiasm, the questions that you spend time here as well, the support you give to the ecosystem, being mentors, being product managers, looking at the role. Everyone needs that help, and the more we engage on this, the better. And obviously to Shravan for facilitating this amazing conversation. And so really happy to be part of the experience here, and excited where we can take this. So thanks,
awesome.
Everybody.